This is the story of one of the darkest chapters in criminal history in the Missouri Ozarks during the early 20th century. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a like on this video. In the winter of 1912, a series of events unfolded in the remote hills of Stone County, Missouri, that would challenge everything investigators thought they understood about human nature and the boundaries between life and death. What began as a simple missing persons case evolved into something far more sinister, something that official records struggled to explain and that local authorities desperately tried to suppress. This is not a story about folklore or legend. Every detail you're about to hear is documented in court records, newspaper archives, and personal journals preserved in the Missouri State Historical Society. What happened in those hills remains to this day one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in American criminal history. The Missouri Ozarks in 1912 was a land of deep hollows and isolated communities, where families lived miles apart and the nearest law enforcement could be days away by horseback. Stone County, established in 1851, was among the poorest and most remote regions in the state. According to the 1910 United States Census, the county's population barely exceeded 8,000 souls, scattered across 463 square miles of rugged forested terrain. In the northeastern corner of the county, approximately 7 miles from the settlement of Galena, stood a weathered farmstead owned by Clara Boone, a widow of 43 years. Clara had lived alone since the death of her husband, Jeremiah Boone, in October 1909. Jeremiah, a distant cousin of the famous frontiersman Daniel Boone, had been a respected farmer and occasional prospector who died under circumstances the local physician, Dr. Raymond Ashford, described in his report as acute respiratory failure. The Boone property consisted of 80 acres of partially cleared land, a 2-story timber frame house built in 1887, and several outbuildings including a root cellar dug into the hillside. Neighbors described Clara as a reclusive woman who rarely came to town except to purchase essential supplies. After Jeremiah's death, her isolation became even more pronounced. Between January and March of 1912, 9 people disappeared in the vicinity of the Boone farmstead. 9 people entered those hills, only 3 emerged alive, and what they claimed to have witnessed would be dismissed by authorities as the ravings of traumatized minds suffering from exposure and malnutrition. But something else happened on that property. Something the official investigation deliberately overlooked, something that documents recently uncovered from the Stone County Courthouse archives suggest was far more sinister than simple murder. The truth, as you will discover, may be more disturbing than any fiction. The events that would become known as the Boone farmstead tragedy began on the morning of January 14, 1912, when a traveling minister named Reverend Thomas Whitmore arrived in Galena with deeply troubling news. According to the diary of Galena's postmaster, Albert Jennings, Reverend Whitmore appeared at the general store in a state of significant distress, his clothing torn and mud-stained, his hands trembling as he requested immediate assistance from local authorities. Whitmore, age 54, was an itinerant preacher affiliated with the Methodist Episcopal Church South. He had been conducting a circuit through remote Ozark communities since November 1911. His ministerial credentials, preserved in the archives of the Missouri Conference of the United Methodist Church, indicate he was an experienced frontier minister with 17 years of service in isolated regions across Missouri and Arkansas. On January 9, 1912, Whitmore had received a letter at the Galena post office. The letter, which was later entered as evidence in the coroner's inquest and is currently housed in the Stone County Historical Society, was written in an elegant flowing script on high-quality linen paper, unusual for the region and time period. The letter, signed by Clara Boone, requested that Reverend Whitmore visit her farmstead to conduct a blessing ceremony for her late husband's grave and to provide spiritual counsel regarding matters she described as of utmost urgency to her immortal soul. Whitmore departed Galena on horseback on the morning of January 10th, accompanied by 2 local men who had agreed to guide him to the remote Boone property, Jacob Thornton, age 32, a timber cutter, and his younger brother Samuel Thornton, age 27, who worked as a part-time deputy for Stone County Sheriff William Garrett. The Thornton brothers were considered reliable men, both married with children, both well regarded in the community. According to Whitmore's subsequent testimony, recorded by Sheriff Garrett on January 15, 1912, the journey to the Boone farmstead took approximately 6 hours through difficult terrain. They arrived at the property shortly before sunset on January 10th. The farmstead appeared well maintained despite Clara's solitary existence. Smoke rose from the chimney. Livestock, including several chickens and 2 goats, moved about the yard. Everything appeared, in Whitmore's words, surprisingly normal and peaceful. Clara Boone greeted them at the door. Whitmore described her as a woman of medium height, with dark hair streaked with grey, dressed in a plain black mourning dress. Her demeanour was calm and gracious. She invited the 3 men inside and offered them supper, which they accepted. The meal, according to Whitmore, consisted of venison stew, cornbread, and preserved vegetables. Clara ate nothing herself, explaining that she was observing a personal fast for spiritual purification. During the meal, Clara spoke extensively about her deceased husband. She described their 22 years of marriage, Jeremiah's kindness and devotion, and the profound loneliness she had endured since his passing. Then, as darkness fell completely outside the small windows, Clara made a statement that Whitmore recorded with remarkable precision in his testimony. She said, "Jeremiah has not left me. He speaks to me every night. He tells me things about the living and the dead, things about what waits for all of us in the darkness between worlds." The Thornton brothers, according to Whitmore, exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. Clara continued, explaining that she had requested the Reverend's presence not for a blessing, but for a demonstration. She wanted Whitmore to witness what she claimed was direct communion with her deceased husband's spirit. She wanted validation from a man of God that what she experienced was genuine and not the product of grief-induced delusion. Whitmore, a man of faith but also of practical frontier sensibility, agreed to observe what Clara proposed, though he privately suspected he was dealing with a widow suffering from profound psychological distress. He agreed to stay the night, as did the Thornton brothers, who were too exhausted from the journey to contemplate an immediate return to Galena in complete darkness. What happened next is documented in multiple sources, including Whitmore's testimony, the Thornton brothers' statements, and most disturbingly, in a personal letter Whitmore sent to his bishop 3 weeks later, a letter that was never made public during his lifetime, but was discovered in the Methodist Conference archives in 1967 by religious historian Dr. Patricia Stromberg. At approximately 9 o'clock that evening, Clara led the 3 men down into the root cellar beneath the house. The cellar, accessed through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor, was larger than typical for such farmsteads. Stone walls extended approximately 12 feet underground, creating a chamber roughly 15 feet by 20 feet in dimension. The temperature was significantly colder than the house above, and Whitmore noted in his testimony that the air carried a peculiar odor he described as resembling copper and damp earth. In the center of the cellar, Clara had arranged an unusual tableau. A wooden chair faced the stone wall at the far end of the chamber. On the wall, someone had painted an elaborate series of symbols that Whitmore did not recognize. They were not Christian iconography. Years later, Dr. Stromberg would identify them, through photographic evidence taken during the investigation, as modified versions of symbols from European grimoire traditions, specifically from Germanic and Alsatian occult manuscripts dating to the 17th century. Before the painted wall stood a small table. On the table rested several items: a daguerreotype photograph in a silver frame showing a stern-faced man Whitmore assumed was Jeremiah Boone, a leather-bound journal, 6 black candles arranged in a specific pattern, and what appeared to be a bundle of dried herbs tied with twine. Clara instructed the 3 men to sit on the floor behind the chair. She then seated herself facing the wall, her back to her guests. She lit the candles using matches from her pocket. The candlelight created shifting shadows across the painted symbols. Then Clara Boone began to speak. Whitmore's testimony describes what followed as the most disturbing experience of his life. Clara did not pray or recite any recognizable religious text. Instead, she spoke in what sounded like a conversation, pausing between her statements as if listening to responses only she could hear. She addressed Jeremiah directly, asking him questions about matters both mundane and profound. She asked about the location of certain tools he had stored before his death. She asked about financial debts owed by neighbors. She asked about the nature of the afterlife. Then, according to all three witnesses, Clara's voice changed. It became deeper, rougher, distinctly masculine. The voice that emerged from Clara Boone's throat was not her own. It answered the questions she had posed. It provided specific information about hidden items, about debts, about secrets known only to Jeremiah Boone. Jacob Thornton would later testify that the voice accurately described the exact location of a hunting knife Jeremiah had lent him years before, a knife Jacob had lost and never returned, a fact no one else knew. The session continued for approximately 40 minutes. During this time, Whitmore observed that Clara's body moved in ways that seemed inconsistent with normal human physiology. Her head tilted at severe angles, her hands contorted. At one point, Samuel Thornton attempted to leave the cellar, but found he could not move his legs, as if paralyzed. Only when Clara's voice returned to normal, and she released whatever force she had invoked, did Samuel find himself able to stand. When Clara finally extinguished the candles and turned to face her guests, Whitmore reported that her eyes appeared completely black in the dim light, though he acknowledged this could have been a trick of shadow. Clara smiled and asked if they were convinced of her abilities. She explained that since Jeremiah's death, she had been perfecting this communion. She claimed that Jeremiah had taught her from beyond death how to serve as a vessel for spirits. She claimed that others in the region, the dead who wandered restless in the Ozark hills, also spoke through her now. Then Clara made an offer that Whitmore described as both fascinating and deeply wrong. She offered to teach them. She said that for a price, for service, for loyalty, she would share this knowledge. She would show them how to speak with their own dead, how to gain wisdom from those who had crossed over, how to acquire power that the church feared and suppressed. Whitmore refused immediately. He declared Clara's practices as blasphemous, as violations of divine law, as consorting with demonic forces rather than genuine spiritual communion. Jacob Thornton agreed. They demanded to leave immediately, despite the late hour. Clara's demeanor changed instantly. The gracious hostess vanished. Her face, according to Whitmore, became cold and predatory. She told them they were free to go, but she warned them that those who rejected her gift and who spoke of what they had witnessed would discover that the dead, once awakened, were not easily silenced. The three men fled the farmstead within minutes, retrieving their horses and riding through the darkness, despite the danger of the terrain. They reached Galena near dawn on January 11th, exhausted and traumatized. Whitmore immediately reported the incident to Sheriff Garrett, though he carefully framed it as suspicion of occult practices rather than genuine supernatural phenomena, knowing how such claims would be received. Sheriff Garrett, according to his official report dated January 12, 1912, was skeptical but concerned enough by Whitmore's distress to plan an investigation of the Boone property. However, before he could organize a proper expedition, new developments transformed the situation from one of potential religious transgression to one of immediate criminal urgency. On January 16, 1912, 2 days after Reverend Whitmore's report to authorities, a local farmer named Ernest Dalton arrived at the Stone County Sheriff's Office with alarming news. Dalton, age 47, owned property approximately 3 miles southwest of the Boone farmstead. According to the incident report filed by Sheriff Garrett and preserved in the Stone County Courthouse records, Dalton reported that his eldest son, Michael Dalton, age 19, had failed to return home after departing on January 13th to check trap lines in the hills near Boone property. Michael Dalton was an experienced woodsman who knew the terrain intimately. His disappearance was unprecedented and deeply concerning to his family. Ernest Dalton informed Sheriff Garrett that Michael had mentioned, before his departure, that he intended to avoid the Boone farmstead entirely due to rumors circulating among local trappers about unusual occurrences in that vicinity. These rumors, which Dalton described as vague warnings about strange lights and unsettling sounds heard at night, had been dismissed by most as superstitious nonsense. Sheriff Garrett organized a search party on the morning of January 17th. The party consisted of 8 men: Sheriff Garrett himself, Deputy Marcus Riley, Ernest Dalton, 4 local volunteers including a tracker named Hiram Walsh, and Reverend Whitmore, who insisted on joining despite his recent traumatic experience. Jacob Thornton also volunteered, though his brother Samuel declined, citing illness. The search party departed Galena at first light. According to Sheriff Garrett's detailed report, written upon his return and currently archived in the Missouri State Historical Society collections, the party reached the area where Michael Dalton's trap lines were located by mid-morning. They discovered Michael's horse tethered to a tree, alive but agitated. Michael's rifle leaned against a nearby rock, unfired. His traps were undisturbed, but Michael himself was nowhere to be found. Hiram Walsh, the tracker, examined the scene carefully. His observations, recorded in Garrett's report, indicated that Michael had dismounted voluntarily and had walked approximately 200 yards in a northwestern direction toward the Boone property. The tracks were clear and unhurried, suggesting Michael had not been fleeing or struggling. Then, inexplicably, the tracks simply stopped in the middle of a small clearing surrounded by oak trees. Walsh stated he had never encountered a trail that ended so abruptly, with no indication of where the person had gone. The search party expanded their efforts, moving toward the Boone farmstead. They arrived at Clara's property shortly after noon. The scene they encountered was described by multiple witnesses in subsequent testimonies as profoundly disturbing. The farmstead appeared abandoned. No smoke rose from the chimney. The livestock that Whitmore had observed during his visit were gone. The front door of the house stood partially open, swinging slightly in the winter wind. Most unsettling, according to Sheriff Garrett's report, was the complete silence. No birds sang. No sounds of wildlife emerged from the surrounding forest. The air itself seemed unnaturally still. Sheriff Garrett called out for Clara Boone multiple times. No response came. He then ordered 2 deputies to approach the house, while the rest of the party maintained positions around the property perimeter. Deputy Riley and volunteer Thomas Ashburn entered the house with weapons drawn. What they found inside was documented in both official reports and in a detailed letter Deputy Riley sent to his sister in Springfield, a letter discovered by historian Dr. Raymond Coulter during research for his 1973 book, Dark Hollow's Criminal Cases of the Missouri Ozarks. The house was in disarray. Furniture had been overturned. Dishes lay shattered on the kitchen floor. Most disturbing were the walls of the main room, which were covered in writing. Someone had used what appeared to be charcoal to write hundreds of words across every available surface. The writing consisted of names, dates, and cryptic phrases. Deputy Riley copied several examples in his report. They come when called. The veil is thinner in the hollow. Jeremiah walks among us. 27 souls answered. Many of the names written on the walls were recognized by the search party members as belonging to deceased residents of Stone County, people who had died years or even decades earlier. In Clara's bedroom upstairs, investigators found her bed undisturbed, but her wardrobe empty. Her personal belongings were gone. On her nightstand lay the leather-bound journal that Whitmore had observed in the root cellar. Sheriff Garrett seized this journal as evidence. The journal, which became central to the subsequent investigation, contained entries spanning from October 1909, immediately after Jeremiah's death, to January 14, 1912, the day after Reverend Whitmore's visit. The journal entries, excerpts of which were published in the Galena Gazette on February 3, 1912, revealed Clara's progressive descent into what authorities initially characterized as religious mania or psychological breakdown. Early entries described her grief and loneliness. By November 1909, she wrote about hearing Jeremiah's voice in the night, believing she could sense his presence in the house. December 1909 entries detailed her first attempts at what she called reaching across the boundary, describing rituals involving candles and spoken invocations. By March 1910, Clara's journal entries had become more elaborate and disturbing. She described successful communications with Jeremiah's spirit. She transcribed conversations, writing both her questions and what she claimed were Jeremiah's responses. The responses contained information Clara insisted she could not have known through normal means, including the locations of items Jeremiah had hidden, details about neighbors' private affairs, and predictions about future events that Clara claimed subsequently came true. The journal entries from summer 1910 revealed a significant development. Clara wrote that Jeremiah's spirit had begun teaching her a systematic method for spirit communication. She described learning what she called the old words, phrases she believed originated from Jeremiah's European ancestry. She mentioned studying books Jeremiah had kept hidden during his lifetime, books on subjects Clara described as the ancient practices of calling and binding. By fall 1910, Clara's journal indicated she was no longer communicating solely with Jeremiah. She wrote about encountering other spirits, describing them as the restless dead of the hills, souls of people who had died in the Ozarks over many decades. She claimed these spirits were drawn to her, seeking a voice, seeking acknowledgement, seeking to influence the world of the living through her as a medium. The final journal entries from January 1912 were the most disturbing. Clara wrote about visitors coming to her farmstead, people seeking her abilities. She mentioned teaching others, initiating them into what she called the communion. She listed names of individuals who had allegedly participated in her sessions, though she used only first names and initials. Most chillingly, her final entry, dated January 14, 1912, stated, "The Reverend has brought consequences. The skeptics bring judgment. But those who have tasted the knowledge will not abandon it. We will continue in the deep places. We will continue where the living do not venture. 27 souls walk with us now, and more will join." The reference to 27 souls deeply troubled investigators. Sheriff Garrett immediately began cross-referencing Clara's journal with records of missing persons in Stone County over the previous 2 years. What he discovered formed the basis for what became an extensive criminal investigation. Between January 1910 and January 1912, 14 people had been reported missing in Stone County. This number was unusually high for such a sparsely populated region. The missing included trappers, traveling salesmen, a school teacher, and several drifters. Local authorities had attributed these disappearances to the dangers of the terrain, to people simply moving on without informing anyone, or to unfortunate accidents in the wilderness. However, when Sheriff Garrett examined the locations where these individuals were last seen or where their belongings were found, a pattern emerged. All 14 disappearances occurred within a 5-mile radius of the Boone farmstead. This geographic clustering was statistically significant and could not be easily dismissed as coincidence. Sheriff Garrett ordered a thorough search of the Boone property, focusing particularly on the root cellar that Reverend Whitmore had described. The search party descended into the cellar on the afternoon of January 17th. What they discovered there would transform the case from missing persons to suspected mass murder. The cellar appeared exactly as Whitmore had described it, with the painted symbols on the wall and the table with ritual implements. However, investigators noticed something Whitmore had not mentioned, likely because the cellar had been dimly lit during his visit. The stone floor, when examined closely, showed signs of extensive disturbance. Several areas had been recently excavated and refilled, poorly concealed beneath scattered straw and dirt. Sheriff Garrett ordered immediate excavation. By the light of multiple lanterns, the search party began carefully removing the disturbed soil. Within 2 hours, they made their first discovery. Approximately 3 feet beneath the surface, they uncovered human remains. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition, making immediate identification impossible. Dr. Raymond Ashford, the same physician who had attended Jeremiah Boone's death, was summoned from Galena to examine the remains. Over the next 3 days, investigators excavated 5 distinct burial sites within the root cellar. They recovered the remains of 5 individuals, 3 men and 2 women, based on Dr. Ashford's preliminary examinations. The condition of the remains varied, suggesting the deaths had occurred at different times over a period of months or possibly years. Dr. Ashford's official report, dated January 25, 1912, and preserved in the Stone County Medical Examiner's archives, provided limited conclusions due to the decomposition. However, he noted several disturbing observations. Multiple sets of remains showed evidence of ante-mortem trauma, suggesting the individuals had suffered injuries before death. More puzzling were unusual markings on several of the skeletal remains, carved symbols that appeared to match some of the symbols painted on the cellar wall. The discovery of bodies at the Boone farmstead triggered an immediate manhunt for Clara Boone. Sheriff Garrett issued wanted notices throughout Missouri and neighboring states. The Galena Gazette published detailed descriptions of Clara and warnings to local communities. The charges listed were murder, multiple counts, though authorities acknowledged they had not yet established definitive cause of death for the victims or confirmed Clara's direct involvement. Meanwhile, the investigation into Michael Dalton's disappearance continued. On January 19th, 2 days after the discovery of bodies in the cellar, a local hunter named Robert Chen reported finding personal effects belonging to Michael Dalton approximately 1 mile north of the Boone property. The items included Michael's coat, his leather gloves, and most disturbingly his boots, arranged in a neat row beside a distinctive rock formation locals called Devil's Tooth, a granite outcropping that protruded from the hillside. The arrangement of the items troubled investigators. The boots were placed side by side, perfectly aligned. The coat was folded. The gloves were positioned as if hands still occupied them. This deliberate organization suggested someone had carefully arranged these belongings rather than their owner having discarded them. Yet there were no tracks around the site, no indication of how the items had arrived there or where Michael himself had gone. As January turned to February, the investigation expanded dramatically. Sheriff Garrett received assistance from state authorities, including a detective from the Missouri State Police named Lieutenant Charles Brennan. Brennan brought more sophisticated investigative techniques and a broader perspective on the case. Lieutenant Brennan's approach, documented in his reports to the Missouri State Police headquarters in Jefferson City, focused on identifying the victims found in the cellar and establishing a timeline of Clara Boone's activities. However, Brennan encountered immediate obstacles. The victims' advanced decomposition made visual identification impossible. Dental records, a nascent investigative tool in 1912, were not available for most rural Ozark residents. Personal effects found with the bodies provided few clues. More troubling was the community's response to the investigation. Lieutenant Brennan noted in his February 8, 1912 report that many Stone County residents were reluctant to discuss Clara Boone or the events at her farmstead. Some refused to speak to investigators entirely. Others provided vague, contradictory information. Brennan suspected that fear, whether of Clara herself or of something associated with her activities, had silenced potential witnesses. The Boone farmstead case remained officially unsolved when the initial investigation concluded in March 1912. Clara Boone was never apprehended. 3 of the 5 bodies recovered from the cellar were never identified. Michael Dalton's fate remained unknown. The case files were eventually archived, and the story faded from public consciousness, remembered only as a tragic but ultimately inexplicable episode in Stone County's frontier history. The case might have remained forgotten indefinitely if not for the work of Dr. Marcus Hillenbrand, a professor of American folklore and regional history at the University of Missouri. In September 1966, Dr. Hillenbrand was conducting research on Ozark folk traditions when he encountered a brief mention of the Boone case in a 1913 collection of Missouri criminal cases. Intrigued by the occult elements described in the historical account, Hillenbrand decided to investigate further. Dr. Hillenbrand's credentials were impeccable. He had earned his doctorate from the University of Chicago in 1952, specializing in American folklore and cultural anthropology. His previous publications included well-regarded studies of Appalachian folk magic and frontier religious movements. He approached the Boone case with scholarly rigor, viewing it as an opportunity to examine the intersection of folk belief, frontier isolation, and criminal behavior in early 20th century America. Hillenbrand's initial research, conducted between September 1966 and March 1967, involved reviewing archived materials at the Stone County Courthouse, the Missouri State Historical Society, and various newspaper collections. His preliminary findings, outlined in a letter to his colleague Dr. Sarah Wentworth at the University of Arkansas, dated March 15, 1967, indicated the case was far more complex than the historical record suggested. Hillenbrand discovered that the original investigation had been incomplete and possibly deliberately constrained. Sheriff Garrett's official reports contained significant gaps. Many witness testimonies referenced in preliminary documents were missing from the final case files. Most intriguingly, Hillenbrand found evidence that several documents had been removed from the archives sometime between 1920 and 1930, with notations indicating the materials had been transferred to state authority without specifying which agency or why. In April 1967, Dr. Hillenbrand traveled to Stone County to conduct field research. His methodology, described in his research notes preserved in the University of Missouri Special Collections, involved interviewing elderly residents who might remember the events or whose parents and grandparents had been involved. He also planned to visit the site of the Boone farmstead, which had been abandoned since 1912. Hillenbrand's field notes from April 1967 reveal a researcher increasingly disturbed by what he was discovering. His initial interviews with Stone County residents produced minimal useful information. Most elderly residents claimed to know nothing about Clara Boone or dismissed the case as exaggerated local legend. However, Hillenbrand noted a consistent pattern. Interviewees became visibly uncomfortable when he mentioned specific details about the case, particularly anything related to the symbols found in the cellar or Clara's claims of spirit communication. On April 19, 1967, Hillenbrand finally located someone willing to speak more openly. Agnes Thornton, age 79, the widow of Samuel Thornton, one of the men who had accompanied Reverend Whitmore to the Boone farmstead in January 1912. Agnes, living in a nursing facility in Springfield, Missouri, had been estranged from the Thornton family for decades following her husband's death in 1931. According to Hillenbrand's notes, Agnes felt free to speak because she had nothing left to protect and no one left to fear. Agnes Thornton's testimony, recorded by Hillenbrand over 3 sessions in late April 1967, provided shocking new details about the case. She revealed that Samuel Thornton had been profoundly affected by his experience at the Boone farmstead, far more than his official statement to authorities indicated. According to Agnes, Samuel had nightmares for months after the incident. He claimed to hear voices in the night, voices calling his name in tones that sounded like deceased relatives. He became obsessed with the idea that Clara Boone had somehow marked him during that night in the cellar, that he had been exposed to something that would not release him. More significantly, Agnes revealed that Samuel had returned to the Boone property in February 1912, after the initial investigation had concluded. He had gone alone, without informing Sheriff Garrett or anyone else except Agnes. His purpose, according to what he told his wife, was to retrieve something he believed Clara had left behind, something he thought might break whatever influence she had established over him. Samuel never told Agnes what he found at the abandoned farmstead, but when he returned, Agnes stated that he was fundamentally changed. He refused to discuss what had occurred. He burned the clothes he had worn during the visit. Most disturbingly, he insisted they leave Stone County immediately. The couple moved to Springfield within weeks, and Samuel forbade any mention of Clara Boone or the events of 1912 for the rest of his life. Agnes also revealed something that had never appeared in any official report. She claimed that in the years following the Boone case, several other people from Stone County had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. These disappearances, occurring sporadically between 1913 and 1925, were never connected to the Boone case by authorities, but Agnes insisted that local residents understood there was a connection, though no one spoke openly about it. She mentioned hearing whispers about the ones who learned from the widow, suggesting Clara had indeed succeeded in teaching her practices to others before her disappearance. Encouraged by Agnes Thornton's testimony, Dr. Hillenbrand intensified his research. In May 1967, he discovered a cache of documents that had somehow escaped archival removal. These documents were housed in the personal papers of Dr. Raymond Ashford, the physician who had examined the bodies found in the Boone cellar. Dr. Ashford had died in 1943, and his papers had been donated to the Stone County Historical Society by his daughter, but had never been properly catalogued or examined. Among Dr. Ashford's papers, Hillenbrand found the physician's personal journal covering the years 1909 to 1915. The journal entries related to the Boone case contained details Ashford had deliberately excluded from his official reports. In an entry dated January 26, 1912, Ashford wrote, "I have completed my examination of the remains recovered from the Boone cellar. What I observed troubles me profoundly, but I dare not include certain details in my official report for fear of being dismissed as superstitious or incompetent." Ashford went on to describe anomalies in the skeletal remains that he could not explain through any medical knowledge available to him. He noted that several of the bones showed unusual brittleness and discoloration, inconsistent with normal decomposition. More disturbing, he observed that the carved symbols on the bones appeared to have been made while the victims were still alive, based on evidence of healing around some of the markings. This suggested the victims had been held captive for extended periods and subjected to ritualistic mutilation before death. Most chilling was Ashford's description of his own experience while examining the remains in his clinic. He wrote, "On the evening of January 24th, while working alone with the skeletal remains laid out on my examination tables, I heard distinct sounds of movement in the clinic, footsteps, whispers. When I investigated, I found nothing, but I experienced an overwhelming sensation of being observed by multiple presences. The temperature in the clinic dropped noticeably. 2 of my gas lamps extinguished spontaneously. I confess I abandoned the clinic that night and did not return until morning, bringing my assistant with me for company. I recognize how this sounds, and I would never speak of it publicly, but I must record it here. Those remains seem to attract something, some presence or force I cannot rationally explain." Dr. Hillenbrand's discovery of Ashford's journal convinced him that the Boone case involved elements beyond simple criminal pathology. He began to research historical occult practices, particularly those associated with necromancy and spirit communication in European folk traditions. His research led him to compare the symbols documented in the Boone cellar with symbols found in various grimoires and occult manuscripts housed in university collections. In July 1967, Hillenbrand contacted Dr. Wilhelm Baumann, a professor of medieval studies at Harvard University and an expert on European occult traditions. Hillenbrand sent Baumann photographs of the symbols from the Boone cellar, taken during the 1912 investigation and preserved in the case files. Dr. Baumann's response, dated July 28, 1967, identified several of the symbols as variants of sigils found in German and Alsatian grimoires from the 16th and 17th centuries, specifically from texts dealing with necromantic practices and spirit summoning. Dr. Baumann noted in his letter that these symbols were not merely decorative or superstitious. Within the context of early modern European occultism, they represented specific ritual technologies believed to facilitate communication with the dead and to grant practitioners power over spiritual entities. Baumann emphasized that while modern scholarship viewed such practices as psychological phenomena or cultural expressions rather than genuine supernatural events, the practitioners themselves had believed absolutely in their efficacy and had approached them with deadly seriousness. This information led Hillenbrand to investigate Jeremiah Boone's background more thoroughly. He discovered that Jeremiah's family had emigrated from Alsace to Pennsylvania in the 1740s, before eventually moving to Missouri in the early 19th century. Census records and family histories revealed that the Boone family had maintained strong cultural ties to their European heritage, including what some family histories euphemistically described as old country traditions and ancestral knowledge. In August 1967, Dr. Hillenbrand decided to visit the site of the Boone farmstead himself. The property had been abandoned since 1912 and had reverted to the state due to unpaid taxes. The buildings had collapsed decades earlier, leaving only foundations and the root cellar, which remained intact underground. Hillenbrand obtained permission from state authorities to excavate and examine the cellar site. Hillenbrand's excavation, conducted over 5 days in late August 1967, uncovered several artifacts that had been missed during the 1912 investigation. These included fragments of burned books, ceremonial implements buried beneath the cellar floor, and most significantly, a metal box containing additional journals and documents. These materials, Hillenbrand believed, represented Clara Boone's reference library and ritual records. The journals found in the metal box, which Hillenbrand documented extensively before they were seized by authorities, contained detailed instructions for various necromantic practices. The writing was in a mixture of English and what Hillenbrand identified as dialectical German. The content described methods for establishing contact with deceased individuals, techniques for maintaining sustained communication with spirits, and most disturbing, procedures for binding spirits to physical objects or locations to create what the texts called permanent gateways. One document in particular caught Hillenbrand's attention. It appeared to be a letter written by Jeremiah Boone, dated September 1909, just weeks before his death. In this letter addressed to Clara, Jeremiah described an experience he had while prospecting in a remote section of the Ozark Hills. He claimed to have discovered a cave containing Native American petroglyphs and burial artifacts. While exploring this cave, Jeremiah wrote that he experienced what he described as a thinning of the veil, a sensation that the boundary between the living world and the realm of the dead was permeable in that location. Jeremiah's letter suggested he believed he had discovered a naturally occurring threshold point, a location where, according to old European folk beliefs he had learned from his grandfather, spiritual communication was inherently easier. He wrote that he planned to study this location further and to attempt to utilize it according to the old family methods. The letter's tone was excited and optimistic, suggesting Jeremiah viewed this as a significant discovery rather than something dangerous. The implications of this letter disturbed Hillenbrand greatly. It suggested that Jeremiah Boone had been actively practicing occult techniques before his death, and that Clara had continued and expanded upon his work after his passing. More troubling, it indicated that the Boone property itself, or some location nearby, might possess characteristics that facilitated the very phenomena Clara claimed to experience. Dr. Hillenbrand spent September and October 1967 attempting to locate the cave Jeremiah had described in his letter. Using Jeremiah's vague directional references and topographical maps of Stone County, Hillenbrand narrowed the possible location to an area approximately 2 miles northeast of the former Boone farmstead. However, the terrain was extremely rugged, and several potential cave sites existed in the region. On October 17, 1967, Hillenbrand's research notes indicate he believed he had located the correct cave. He planned to explore it the following day. His notes from that evening, written at a motel in Galena, expressed both excitement and unease. He wrote, "I believe I am close to understanding what really happened here in 1912. The evidence suggests that Clara Boone was not simply a disturbed woman or a charlatan. She may have been attempting to operationalize genuine occult technologies within a context that gave them unusual potency. Whether anything she contacted was objectively real or purely psychological is ultimately less important than understanding that she believed it was real, and that belief may have had consequences that extended beyond her own psychology to affect others who came into contact with her practices." Dr. Marcus Hillenbrand was reported missing on October 19, 1967. When he failed to return to the University of Missouri for scheduled classes on October 21st, concerned colleagues contacted authorities in Stone County. A search party located Hillenbrand's rental car parked near a hiking trail approximately 2 miles from the former Boone farmstead on October 22nd. His research materials, including his notes and the artifacts he had recovered from the Boone cellar, were in the vehicle. His personal effects, including his wallet and camping gear, were also present, but Dr. Hillenbrand himself was never found. The search for Hillenbrand continued for 3 weeks, involving state police, volunteer searchers, and tracking dogs. No trace of the professor was discovered. No signs of struggle were evident at the scene. His footprints led from his vehicle along the trail for approximately half a mile before disappearing in a rocky area near a cave entrance. Searchers explored the cave, which extended approximately 200 feet into the hillside, but found nothing except some unusual markings on the cave walls that appeared to match descriptions of the symbols found in the Boone cellar. The official conclusion of the investigation, reached in November 1967, was that Dr. Hillenbrand had likely suffered an accident while exploring the cave system, possibly falling into an unmapped shaft or becoming lost in a collapse. His body, authorities speculated, might never be recovered due to the complex geology of the region. However, Dr. Hillenbrand's disappearance had one final disturbing element. On November 3, 1967, the University of Missouri received a package addressed to the Department of History. The package had been mailed from Galena, Missouri, on October 18, 1967, the day before Hillenbrand's disappearance. Inside was a cassette tape and a brief handwritten note from Hillenbrand stating only, "If I do not return, this recording must be preserved and studied. What Clara Boone discovered is real." The cassette tape, which was copied and archived in the University of Missouri Special Collections, contains approximately 40 minutes of audio recorded by Dr. Hillenbrand. The recording, dated October 17, 1967, documents Hillenbrand's thoughts and observations during his final days of research. Most of the recording consists of Hillenbrand describing the artifacts he had found and outlining his theories about the occult practices associated with the Boone case. However, the final 10 minutes of the recording are deeply unsettling. Hillenbrand describes hearing unusual sounds while examining the cave entrance on October 17th. He reports hearing what sounded like voices speaking in the distance, though he was alone in that remote location. He describes feeling an overwhelming sensation of being watched and a powerful compulsion to enter the cave despite the approaching darkness. Then, most disturbingly, the character of Hillenbrand's voice on the recording changes. He begins speaking more rapidly, his tone becoming agitated. He states, "I understand now. She wasn't controlling it. It was using her. The threshold is real. The dead are here. They've always been here. They're speaking to me now. They're telling me things. Things about the nature of death, about what waits beyond. They're showing me, oh God, they're showing me." The recording ends abruptly at that point, cutting off mid-sentence. Audio analysis conducted by the University of Missouri in 1968 indicated the recording had not been tampered with or edited. Whatever Hillenbrand experienced in those final recorded moments remains unknown, but his psychological state was clearly deteriorating rapidly. Dr. Hillenbrand's disappearance effectively ended serious academic research into the Boone case for over a decade. His fate served as a cautionary tale within scholarly circles. His research materials, including the artifacts from the Boone cellar and the documents he had recovered, were seized by Missouri State Police and classified under a statute dealing with evidence in ongoing investigations. Despite multiple Freedom of Information requests over subsequent years, these materials have never been released to researchers or the public. The Boone case remained dormant in public consciousness following Dr. Hillenbrand's disappearance until the mid-1980s, when a series of incidents in Stone County began to draw renewed attention to the region's dark history. These contemporary events, documented by law enforcement and forestry officials, suggested that whatever phenomena had manifested in 1912 had not been entirely extinguished by the passage of time. In March 1984, the Missouri Department of Conservation assigned a new ranger, David Pritchard, to oversee a section of the Mark Twain National Forest that included the area where the Boone farmstead had once stood. Pritchard, age 34, was an experienced outdoorsman with 12 years of service in various Missouri state parks and forests. His assignment to Stone County was considered routine, managing wildlife populations, maintaining trails, and monitoring for illegal activities such as poaching or unauthorized camping. Pritchard's incident reports, filed with the Department of Conservation between March 1984 and August 1985, and obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests by journalist Kevin Marsden in 1998, document a progressive series of unusual occurrences in the region. The reports, preserved in the Missouri Department of Conservation archives in Jefferson City, reveal a pattern of phenomena that Pritchard initially dismissed as natural, but eventually came to view as deeply anomalous. Pritchard's first report of unusual activity came in May 1984. While conducting a routine patrol approximately 1 mile from the site of the former Boone property, Pritchard encountered what he described as an abandoned campsite. The site showed evidence of recent occupation, including a fire pit with warm ashes, but no camping permits had been issued for that area. More puzzling was the arrangement of items at the site. Personal belongings, including a backpack, sleeping bag, and cooking equipment, were laid out in an unnaturally orderly pattern. The sleeping bag was spread flat with perfect symmetry. Cooking utensils were arranged in precise geometric patterns. 6 stones had been placed in a perfect circle around the fire pit. Pritchard attempted to locate the camper, assuming they had temporarily left the site. However, despite searching the surrounding area and calling out repeatedly, he found no one. He left a citation notice for illegal camping and continued his patrol. When he returned to the site 3 days later, everything remained exactly as he had found it, including his citation notice, which had not been moved. The camper had apparently never returned. Over the following months, Pritchard encountered several more abandoned campsites in the same general area, each displaying similar characteristics: recent occupation, orderly arrangement of belongings, and no sign of the campers themselves. By September 1984, Pritchard had documented 7 such sites. In his report dated September 15, 1984, he noted, "The pattern of these abandonments is becoming concerning. The geographic clustering within a 2-mile radius and the consistent arrangement of belongings suggests either a coordinated hoax or something more troubling. I have contacted Stone County Sheriff's Department to coordinate investigation into possible foul play." The Stone County Sheriff's Department, then headed by Sheriff Donald Krebs, investigated Pritchard's reports but found no evidence of criminal activity. No missing persons reports matched the timeline of the abandoned campsites. The belongings left behind contained no identification, and when subjected to forensic examination, yielded no useful fingerprints or DNA evidence. The items appeared to be standard camping equipment, purchased from various retail outlets across Missouri and neighboring states, offering no investigative leads. In November 1984, Pritchard's reports took a more disturbing turn. On November 8th, while conducting a patrol near dusk, Pritchard reported observing what he initially believed to be a group of hikers approximately 300 yards distant, visible through trees on a hillside. He counted 7 individuals moving in single file along what appeared to be a deer trail. Pritchard attempted to approach them to check for proper permits, but as he closed the distance, the figures seemed to vanish. When he reached the location where he had observed them, he found no tracks, no disturbed vegetation, no evidence that anyone had been there. Pritchard's report of this incident is notably cautious in its language. He wrote, "I acknowledge this observation may have been a trick of failing light or my own visual misperception. However, I am experienced in wilderness observation and have never encountered such a complete visual misidentification. The figures I observed appeared solid and real. Their disappearance was instantaneous, not gradual. I found this experience deeply unsettling and am documenting it for the record, though I recognize how it may sound." Similar sightings by Ranger Pritchard occurred on 4 more occasions between November 1984 and March 1985. Each sighting followed the same pattern. Multiple figures observed at a distance in the vicinity of the former Boone property, apparent solidity and reality of the figures, and complete absence of physical evidence when the location was examined. Pritchard noted that the sightings always occurred during twilight hours and always in overcast or foggy conditions when visibility was naturally reduced. By April 1985, Pritchard had begun researching the history of the area he patrolled. His reports indicate he discovered information about the Boone case and Dr. Hillenbrand's disappearance. In a report dated April 22, 1985, Pritchard wrote, "I have become aware of historical incidents in this region that may contextualize the anomalies I have been documenting. While I remain committed to rational explanations for unusual observations, I believe the geographic consistency of reported phenomena spanning decades warrants serious consideration that environmental or psychological factors specific to this location may be contributing to these experiences." Pritchard's final report, filed on August 3, 1985, described an experience that ultimately led to his resignation from the Department of Conservation. On the evening of August 1, 1985, Pritchard was conducting a solo patrol when his vehicle broke down on a Forest Service road approximately half a mile from the site of the former Boone farmstead. With darkness approaching and no radio communication available in that remote area, Pritchard decided to hike to a ranger station approximately 3 miles away, rather than remain with his disabled vehicle overnight. According to his detailed report, as Pritchard walked along the forest road in deepening twilight, he became aware of sounds behind him. Footsteps, multiple sets of footsteps, maintaining pace with his own. When he stopped, the footsteps stopped. When he resumed walking, the footsteps resumed. Pritchard turned multiple times to observe who was following him, but saw nothing in the gathering darkness. As he continued, Pritchard reported hearing voices. Not words he could distinguish, but the unmistakable sound of human voices speaking in conversational tones, emanating from the forest on both sides of the road. The voices seemed to parallel his progress, maintaining a constant distance. Pritchard called out, identifying himself as a ranger and requesting that whoever was present make themselves known. The voices continued, unresponsive to his calls. Then, according to Pritchard's report, he saw lights ahead on the road. Not the headlights of a vehicle, but smaller lights moving at approximately human height, bobbing slightly as if carried by walking individuals. Pritchard counted 6 distinct lights approaching him. He stopped, waiting for what he assumed were hikers with flashlights to reach him so he could request their assistance with his vehicle. As the lights drew closer, Pritchard reported becoming aware that something was profoundly wrong. The lights moved with perfect synchronization, rising and falling in identical patterns. No sound of footsteps accompanied them despite the gravel road surface that should have crunched audibly. Most disturbing, as the lights came within approximately 50 yards, Pritchard realized he could not discern any human forms carrying them. The lights appeared to float independently, without visible source. Pritchard, an experienced outdoorsman who had encountered wildlife, weather phenomena, and various natural occurrences throughout his career, made a decision that surprised even himself upon later reflection. He left the road, moving into the forest, and concealed himself behind a large oak tree. He watched as the 6 lights passed his position, continuing down the road in the direction he had been traveling. The lights moved steadily, maintaining their formation, until they disappeared around a curve approximately 200 yards distant. After the lights vanished, Pritchard remained hidden for approximately 10 minutes, hearing nothing but normal forest sounds. Then he emerged and continued his journey to the ranger station, leaving the road and traveling cross-country through difficult terrain to avoid any possibility of encountering the lights again. He reached the ranger station near midnight, physically exhausted and, by his own admission, psychologically shaken. Pritchard submitted his resignation to the Department of Conservation on August 10, 1985. In his resignation letter, portions of which were published in Kevin Marsden's 1999 investigative article, The Ozark Anomalies, in the magazine 40 and Studies, Pritchard stated, "I can no longer perform my duties in the assigned region with the confidence and rationality required of a conservation officer. My experiences have challenged my understanding of what is possible in the natural world. Whether these experiences represent genuine anomalous phenomena or indicate a psychological vulnerability on my part, I cannot determine. Either way, I am no longer the appropriate person for this assignment." Following Pritchard's resignation, the Department of Conservation conducted an internal review of his reports and assigned a new ranger, James Holcomb, to the region. Holcomb's tenure lasted only 14 months. His incident reports, obtained through the same FOIA requests that revealed Pritchard's documents, show a similar progression of unusual observations, though Holcomb was more reluctant to document them officially and instead noted them primarily in personal logs that were later discovered among his effects. Holcomb's most significant contribution to the contemporary evidence surrounding the Boone case came in October 1986. While investigating reports of illegal hunting activity, Holcomb discovered a cave entrance, partially concealed by vegetation, approximately 1.8 miles northeast of the former Boone farmstead location. The cave matched descriptions from Dr. Hillenbrand's research notes, suggesting it might be the same location Jeremiah Boone had described in his 1909 letter. Holcomb entered the cave and explored approximately 150 feet into the system. Using a Polaroid camera, he photographed the interior, documenting extensive markings on the cave walls. These photographs, preserved in the Department of Conservation files, show symbols that match those documented in the Boone farmstead cellar in 1912. However, the cave markings appeared significantly older, weathered by time and mineral deposits. More disturbing were Holcomb's photographs of the deepest chamber he explored. The chamber, roughly circular and approximately 20 feet in diameter, contained evidence of human activity. A ring of stones formed a circle in the center of the chamber. Within this circle, the stone floor had been carved with elaborate symbols forming what appeared to be a complex geometric pattern. Holcomb's photographs also captured what appeared to be offerings or ritual deposits, animal bones arranged in specific patterns, fragments of cloth, metal objects including coins and jewelry, and most disturbingly, what Holcomb identified in his report as possible human bone fragments, though he did not collect these for analysis. Holcomb reported experiencing severe disorientation and anxiety while in the cave's deep chamber. His written report describes a sensation of being watched, difficulty breathing despite adequate airflow, and an overwhelming compulsion to leave immediately. He exited the cave and sealed the entrance with debris, marking its location on his maps, but recommending in his report that it be permanently closed and restricted from public access. The Stone County Sheriff's Department, upon receiving Holcomb's report and photographs, organized an expedition to the cave in November 1986. The expedition team included Sheriff Krebs, 2 deputies, a forensic specialist from the Missouri State Police, and Dr. Ellen Vostro, an archaeologist from Southwest Missouri State University who specialized in Native American sites. The purpose was to document the cave's contents thoroughly and determine if any criminal activity, past or present, was associated with the location. Dr. Vostro's preliminary report, dated November 18, 1986, and archived at Southwest Missouri State University, concluded that the cave markings consisted of multiple layers from different time periods. The oldest markings, partially obscured by mineral deposits, appeared to be genuine Native American petroglyphs, possibly Osage in origin, dating to approximately 1600 to 1700 CE. However, overlaying these ancient markings were more recent additions that Vostro identified as consistent with European occult symbolism from the 17th through 19th centuries. Most significantly, Vostro identified what she believed were very recent additions to the cave markings, possibly created within the previous 20 years. These recent markings appeared to be attempts to reproduce or elaborate upon the older symbols, suggesting that someone had been using the cave for ritual purposes in the modern era. The physical evidence of offerings and deposits in the deep chamber supported this conclusion. The bone fragments collected by the forensic team were sent to the Missouri State Crime Laboratory for analysis. The results, returned in December 1986, confirmed that several fragments were human in origin. Carbon dating and other analyses suggested the bones were approximately 70 to 100 years old, consistent with the time period of the Boone case. However, the fragmentary nature of the remains and their degraded condition made more specific identification impossible. The cave discovery generated significant concern among law enforcement and academic communities. The possibility that occult practices associated with Clara Boone had continued in the region for decades after her disappearance suggested either that Clara herself had remained in the area longer than assumed, that she had successfully taught others her techniques before disappearing, or that the cave itself held some significance that drew practitioners independently of Clara's direct influence. In response to these findings, the Missouri State Police opened a cold case investigation in January 1987, attempting to connect the cave evidence with any missing persons cases from the region over the previous 75 years. Detective Lieutenant Raymond Cross, assigned to lead this investigation, spent 6 months reviewing files and interviewing long-time Stone County residents. Cross's final report, submitted in July 1987 and obtained through FOIA requests by researcher Amanda Chen in 2003, documented at least 23 missing persons cases in Stone County between 1912 and 1986 that shared common characteristics. Disappearances occurred in the geographic area surrounding the former Boone property. Victims were often found to have had possessions left behind in organized arrangements, and investigations yielded no conventional explanations for the disappearances. Most disturbing was Cross's discovery that several of the more recent missing persons, particularly from the 1960s and 1970s, had documented interests in occultism, spiritualism, or paranormal investigation prior to their disappearances. Cross's report included the following observation. The evidence suggests that the Boone farmstead area has acquired a reputation within certain subcultures as a location of paranormal significance. It appears that individuals with interests in occult practices have been drawn to this location over many decades, possibly seeking to replicate or experience the phenomena associated with Clara Boone. The fate of these individuals remains unknown, but the pattern is consistent and deeply concerning. The cave was officially sealed by the Missouri Department of Conservation in August 1987. A steel gate was installed at the entrance, and warning signs were posted. The location was removed from public maps and trail guides. Access to the area was restricted to authorized personnel only. These measures were presented to the public as environmental protection for sensitive geological and archaeological resources, with no mention of the cave's association with the Boone case or concerns about occult activity. However, enforcement of the restriction proved difficult due to the remote nature of the location. In subsequent years, the cave gate was found damaged or removed on multiple occasions, indicating unauthorized entry. In 1992, forest rangers discovered evidence of recent occupation in the cave, including modern camping equipment, battery-powered lanterns, and what appeared to be ritual implements including candles, incense burners, and a notebook containing handwritten occult symbols and invocations. The notebook, seized as evidence by Stone County Sheriff's Department, was never returned to any claimant and remains in evidence storage. Photographs of selected pages, published in a 2001 article in the journal Paranormal Anthropology by researcher Dr. Michael Strand, show content that explicitly references Clara Boone and attempts to reconstruct her practices based on historical accounts and the author's own experimentation. The most recent documented incident in the Boone area occurred in October 2003. A group of 5 college students from the University of Arkansas, interested in paranormal investigation, traveled to Stone County with the explicit intention of exploring the sealed cave and conducting what they described in their planning documents as a spirit communication experiment. The students had researched the Boone case online and believed they could make contact with Clara Boone's spirit or with the entities she had allegedly communicated with. The students, identified in subsequent police reports as Brian Decker, age 21, Amanda Reeves, age 20, Christopher Lang, age 22, Sarah Mendez, age 19, and Tyler Shue, age 20, arrived in Stone County on October 15, 2003. They were equipped with camping gear, recording equipment including video cameras and audio recorders, and various implements they believed were necessary for occult practices, including candles, a Ouija board, and printed materials about spirit communication techniques. The students broke through the cave gate and entered the cave system on the night of October 16, 2003. They set up recording equipment in the deep chamber and, according to their own video footage later recovered by authorities, attempted to conduct a seance-style ritual beginning at approximately 11:00 p.m. The video footage, reviewed by Stone County Sheriff's Department and described in their incident report dated October 23, 2003, shows the students sitting in a circle, attempting to invoke spirits using a combination of phrases they had researched and improvised language. The video recording runs for approximately 43 minutes. For the first 30 minutes, nothing unusual appears to occur beyond the students' own nervous excitement and occasional claims of feeling cold spots or sensing presences. However, at approximately the 30-minute mark, the video captures several anomalies. The audio picks up sounds that were not made by any of the students, described in the police report as resembling distant voices or whispers. The temperature in the cave, as indicated by a thermometer visible in the frame, drops noticeably over a period of about 2 minutes. Then, most dramatically, At approximately the 38-minute mark, all 5 students react simultaneously to something not visible on camera. They turn their heads in unison toward the dark entrance of the chamber. Amanda Reeves can be heard saying, "What is that?" followed by Sarah Mendez screaming. The students scramble to their feet, abandoning their equipment and rush toward the camera, which is knocked over in their panic. The video continues recording for another 2 minutes, capturing only the cave ceiling and the sounds of the students' panicked breathing and frantic movement as they flee the chamber. The video ends when the camera's battery apparently dies. The students' audio recorders, however, continued operating. The audio files recovered later capture the students' terrified flight through the cave system and their emergence into the night outside. The audio includes repeated statements by multiple students claiming they saw figures in the cave, human-shaped forms that appeared from the darkness of deeper passages they had not explored. Christopher Lang can be heard stating, "They were walking toward us. There were so many of them. How could there be so many people in there?" The 5 students fled the cave area and drove directly to the Stone County Sheriff's Office, arriving at approximately 2:30 a.m. on October 17, 2003. They reported their experience to the deputy on duty and requested that authorities investigate the cave. They insisted they had seen multiple people in the cave, though they acknowledged they had not seen faces or specific details due to the darkness and their panic. A sheriff's department team investigated the cave later that day on October 17th. They recovered the students' abandoned equipment, including the video camera, audio recorders, and ritual implements. The investigation found no evidence of any other people in the cave. No footprints beyond those of the students were found. No camping equipment or supplies suggesting other occupants were discovered. The cave showed no signs of recent human activity beyond the students' own intrusion. The students' video and audio recordings were analyzed by the sheriff's department and later by a private audio forensics consultant hired by Brian Decker's father, who was a prominent attorney in Little Rock, Arkansas. The audio consultant's report, completed in November 2003, confirmed that the voice-like sounds captured on the recordings were genuine audio phenomena, not equipment malfunction or environmental noise. However, the consultant could not definitively identify the source of the sounds, noting only that they exhibited characteristics consistent with human vocalization, but with unusual tonal qualities. All 5 students were cited for trespassing and destruction of public property for breaking through the cave gate. However, no serious charges were filed. In subsequent interviews conducted by paranormal researchers and journalists, the students maintained their account of seeing figures in the cave. They described experiencing lasting psychological effects from the incident, including nightmares, anxiety, and persistent feelings of being watched. Sarah Mendez, in a 2008 interview published in the magazine Weird Tales, stated, "Whatever we encountered in that cave was real. I don't care if there's no evidence. I know what I saw. We woke something up in there, something that had been waiting." The Boone farmstead case remains officially unsolved. Clara Boone was never found, never apprehended, never brought to justice for the crimes authorities believed she committed. The identities of 3 of the 5 victims recovered from her cellar remain unknown. Dr. Marcus Hillenbrand's disappearance has never been explained. The fates of the numerous individuals who vanished in the vicinity of the Boone property over more than 9 decades remain mysteries without resolution. What can be stated with certainty, based on documented evidence spanning over a century, is that the region surrounding the former Boone farmstead in Stone County, Missouri, has been associated with consistent anomalous phenomena. Whether these phenomena represent genuine supernatural occurrences, psychological effects generated by isolation and suggestion, or some combination of natural factors unique to that geographic location, the pattern is undeniable. People who venture into that area seeking contact with the dead, seeking validation of occult beliefs, or simply seeking answers to the historical mysteries, often experience profound psychological distress and, in some cases, never return. The cave remains sealed. The Forest Service roads leading to the area are closed to public access. Warning signs are posted throughout the region, though they cite environmental protection rather than the darker reasons for restriction. Local residents, those whose families have lived in Stone County for generations, generally refuse to discuss the Boone case or to venture into the hills where Clara once lived. If you find yourself in the Missouri Ozarks, if you encounter historical references to Clara Boone or Jeremiah Boone, if you discover unmarked trails leading into isolated hollows in Stone County, consider this warning. 9 people entered those hills in January 1912, seeking knowledge of the dead. Only 3 emerged, their minds shattered by what they claimed to witness. A respected academic disappeared there in 1967 while seeking rational explanations. 5 college students fled in terror in 2003 from something they could not explain. The threshold Clara Boone claimed to have opened may never have truly closed. Some boundaries, once crossed, remain permeable. Some invitations, once extended, cannot be revoked. The dead, once given voice, may never willingly return to silence. If you see lights moving through the forest at twilight where no light should be, if you hear voices speaking in conversational tones from the darkness of the trees, if you encounter abandoned campsites with belongings arranged in impossibly perfect order, do not investigate, do not seek explanation, leave immediately. Clara Boone spoke with the dead. The evidence suggests the dead answered. Whether they ever stopped speaking, whether they wait still in those dark hills for those foolish enough to listen, is a question best left forever unanswered.